eyes, you thief! How dare you stand there and deny? You're being wrong, lady! Back up!
She called her black neighbor a burglar. Seconds later, the U.S. Marshal badge came out. The story opens with Emily Parker's shrill accusation shattering the suburban tranquility. "Step away from that house right now. I've called the police. We don't allow criminals in this neighborhood." This immediately establishes high-stakes racial conflict and sets the tone for the Karen archetype confrontation, with Emily's phone aimed at Anthony like a weapon, recording what she believes is evidence of a crime. The narrative introduces Anthony Reed as a composed, professional federal agent who is being recorded and interrogated on his own property, key still in hand, surrounded by moving boxes he'd been unloading all morning. It then provides backstories for both the neighborhood, Willow Creek Estates, a gated community 40 minutes from Chicago where homes start at $750,000, and diversity means 2 black families among 200 households, and Anthony, a 38-year-old deputy U.S. Marshal with 15 years of distinguished service who has apprehended over 120 fugitives and testified against cartel leaders, establishing the devastating irony that a man who enforces federal law is being treated as if he's breaking it, and that someone who has faced down dangerous criminals now finds himself more afraid on his own lawn than he's ever been in the field. Anthony Reed had spent 15 years living out of suitcases. Hotel rooms in Memphis where he tracked a fugitive for 3 weeks. Rental apartments in Phoenix that never quite felt like home. Safe houses in Detroit where the walls were thin and the neighbors asked no questions. That was the life of a deputy U.S. Marshal, transient, necessary, and exhausting. At 38, with over 120 fugitive apprehensions to his name and commendations from directors he'd never met, Anthony wanted something radical: permanence. When he first drove through the gates of Willow Creek Estates, 40 minutes northwest of Chicago, he felt something shift in his chest. The subdivision sprawled across manicured acres where every lawn was precisely edged, every mailbox matched the approved HOA palette, and every driveway held European sedans that gleamed under careful washing. The home started at $750,000 and climbed quickly from there. This was the American dream, packaged and gated, with a 24-hour security booth and resident app for reporting concerns. 847, Birch Lane sat at the end of a cul-de-sac, a colonial revival with cream siding, black shutters, and a front porch that wrapped halfway around. Anthony stood in the empty living room during his final walkthrough, sunlight streaming through windows that overlooked a backyard he'd already imagined hosting barbecues in. He signed the papers that afternoon, $825,000, nearly every dollar he'd saved over a decade and a half of federal service. The Willow Creek marketing materials featured stock photos of diverse families laughing at community events, children of every shade playing in the Central Park. But Anthony had done his research. 200 households. 2 black families before him. The word diversity appeared 17 times in the welcome brochure. The reality was visible from every porch. Willow Creek was a place where people who looked like Anthony were expected to be delivering packages or mowing lawns, not holding mortgage papers and keys. Still, Anthony believed in the promise. He'd spent his career proving himself in rooms where he was the only face like his, earning respect through competence and professionalism. He thought, naively, perhaps, that his neighbors would see him the same way his colleagues did. A federal agent. A decorated officer. A man who dedicated his life to justice. He was wrong. Emily Parker noticed the black Dodge Charger on its first visit to 847, Birch Lane. She was standing at her kitchen window, coffee cup in hand, when the unfamiliar vehicle pulled into the driveway 3 houses down. A black man stepped out, looked around the property, then walked to the front door with keys in hand. Emily's pulse quickened. The Hendersons had moved out 6 weeks ago, but she hadn't seen any moving trucks, any realtor signs changing to sold, any welcoming committee forming. She grabbed her phone and opened the Willow Creek Neighborhood Watch Facebook group, her fingers moving quickly across the screen. Unfamiliar vehicle on Birch Lane. Black Dodge Charger. Just wanted everyone to stay alert. She added a photo taken through her kitchen window, blurry but clear enough to show the car's profile. The comments came quickly. Thanks for keeping us informed. Better safe than sorry. Did you get a license plate? 3 days later, the charger returned. This time Anthony spent an hour walking the property's perimeter, taking measurements, making notes on his phone. Emily watched from her bedroom window now, documenting his movements with her phone's camera. She zoomed in on his face, his clothes, the way he tried the back door and then walked around to the garage. Each photo became evidence in the case she was building in her mind. Her Facebook posts escalated with each sighting. Same vehicle back again on Birch Lane. Unknown black male accessing vacant property. Has anyone contacted the Hendersons to verify? The responses grew more alarmed, more conspiratorial. This is concerning. Have you called the police? We pay HOA fees for security, where are they? By the third week, Emily had created a dossier without realizing it. She'd photographed Anthony's car 7 times, noted his arrival and departure times, usually late afternoon on weekdays, occasionally on Saturday mornings, and documented his suspicious behavior, which consisted of measuring windows, inspecting the roof, and once bringing what looked like paint samples to the front door. Urgent, unknown black male repeatedly accessing vacant property at 847, Birch Lane, she posted on week 4. I've seen him multiple times now, always alone, always looking around before he enters. This doesn't feel right. Everyone please stay alert and watch your properties. Emily told herself she was being a good neighbor, a vigilant community member. She never once considered walking across the street to introduce herself or simply asking what was happening. Tuesday afternoon arrived with cloudless skies and the kind of suburban quiet that makes people forget the rest of the world exists. Anthony had taken a personal day specifically for this moment, moving day, the first load of furniture from the storage unit he'd rented 3 weeks ago. His friend Marcus had helped him load the U-Haul that morning, and now Anthony stood in his driveway, box cutter in hand, preparing to slash the tape on his first box of books. He never heard Emily Parker approach. Her voice arrived first, shrill and accusatory, cutting through the peaceful afternoon like a siren. Step away from that house right now. Anthony turned, box cutter still in his hand, to see his neighbor standing at the edge of his driveway. She was 40-something, blonde hair pulled back, wearing yoga pants and a Willow Creek Recreation Committee t-shirt. Her phone was raised, camera pointed directly at him, recording. I've called the police, Emily continued, her voice rising with each word. We don't allow criminals in this neighborhood. Whatever you're stealing, it's not worth it. Anthony felt his stomach drop, that familiar sickening sensation he'd experienced too many times in his life, the moment when he realized someone had looked at him and seen only threat. He carefully set down the box cutter, raised his hand slightly, and spoke in the calm, measured tone he'd perfected over 15 years of de-escalating dangerous situations. Ma'am, I'm Anthony Reed. I'm the homeowner. I closed on this property 3 weeks ago. I'm just moving in. Emily's expression didn't change. If anything, her grip on her phone tightened. No, you're not. I know the people who lived here. You don't belong here. I have documentation in my car, Anthony said, gesturing slowly toward his vehicle. My deed, my driver's license, my... Don't move. Emily shouted. The police are already on their way. You can explain it to them. Anthony became aware of movement in his peripheral vision. Doors opening. Neighbors emerging onto porches and lawns. Some held phones, recording this unexpected entertainment. Others simply watched, arms crossed, waiting to see how this drama would unfold. Not one of them walked over to introduce themselves or ask what was happening. Anthony stood frozen in his own driveway, hands visible, heartbeat thundering in his ears, wondering how explaining his existence to police officers on his own property could possibly end well. The police cruiser arrived within 6 minutes, followed 30 seconds later by a second vehicle. Detectives Morrison and Chin emerged with the practiced casualness of officers who'd done this 1,000 times, but Anthony noticed their hands hovering near their service weapons, their eyes scanning him first, the property second. He recognized the body language, he'd used it himself when approaching potentially dangerous situations. "Officers, I'm Deputy U.S Marshal Anthony Reed," he said immediately, keeping his hands visible at his sides. "I'm the homeowner here. This is a misunderstanding. My credentials are in my wallet in my back right pocket. I can." "Don't move," Detective Morrison cut him off. "Keep your hands where we can see them." "Sir, I'm a federal agent." "I'm not." "We'll sort that out," Detective Chen said, already moving behind Anthony. "Right now, we have a report of a possible burglary in progress. We need to secure the scene." Anthony felt hands patting him down, professional and impersonal, searching for weapons. His wallet was pulled from his pocket. His phone confiscated. His keys taken. The box cutter he'd set down was photographed and bagged as potential evidence. Through it all, Anthony remained calm, hands visible, breathing steady, doing everything he'd been trained to do and everything his father had taught him about surviving encounters with police. "Sir, we're going to need you to sit on the curb while we verify your story," Morrison said, his tone suggesting this was routine procedure rather than profound humiliation. Anthony sat. The concrete was warm from afternoon sun. His neighbors continued watching, some recording, a few whispering behind raised hands. Emily Parker stood near the officers, providing them with her timeline of suspicious activity, showing them her surveillance photos, explaining how many times she'd seen this man accessing the property. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Morrison and Chen stood by their cruiser, running Anthony's information, making calls, conferring in low voices. They interviewed Emily at length, treating her observations with the seriousness of eyewitness testimony. When Anthony asked if he could retrieve his documentation from the car, Morrison told him to stay seated. 40 minutes. A third officer arrived. More consultation. Anthony watched them photograph his U-Haul, his personal vehicle, even the boxes still stacked in his driveway. His federal credentials, the badge he'd earned through years of exemplary service, sat in an evidence bag on the cruiser's hood like suspicious contraband. At 50 minutes, Anthony's phone began ringing inside the evidence bag. The officers ignored it. It rang again. And again. Someone was trying very hard to reach him. Carmen Rodriguez had tried Anthony's number 7 times in 15 minutes. Her administrative assistant had called twice. By the third attempt from Rodriguez herself, she knew something was deeply wrong. Anthony Reed was many things, dedicated, meticulous, occasionally too serious, but he always answered his phone, especially during duty hours. When Detective Morrison finally picked up, Rodriguez's voice could have frozen water. "This is Supervisory Deputy U.S. Marshal Carmen Rodriguez. You're holding the phone of one of my agents. I need you to explain, very carefully, why Deputy Reed isn't answering his phone himself." Morrison's confident tone faltered slightly. "Ma'am, we're investigating a possible burglary. We're just verifying some information." "You're investigating my deputy for burglary." Rodriguez's words came out flat, controlled, each syllable carrying 20 years of federal authority. "On what property?" 847, Birch Lane, ma'am. "We received a call." 847, Birch Lane. "The property Deputy Reed purchased 3 weeks ago. The property he's been preparing to move into." "That property." It wasn't a question. Rodriguez had helped Anthony pick out paint colors. She'd listened to him talk about finally having a permanent address for the first time in his career. "Ma'am, we're just following procedure. Your procedure involves confiscating a federal agent's credentials and phone, forcing him to sit on a curb, and treating him like a suspect on his own property." Rodriguez's voice remained level, but Morrison could hear the fury underneath, coiled and dangerous. "Where are you right now? Don't move. I'm 10 minutes away." She was actually 12 minutes away, but she made it in 9. Her vehicle pulled up with federal plates visible, and Carmen Rodriguez emerged looking every inch the supervisory agent she was, credentials already displayed, her expression promising consequences. She was 52, Puerto Rican, and had been breaking down doors and assumptions for 2 decades. "Deputy Reed, are you injured?" she asked first, ignoring the local officers entirely. "No, ma'am," Anthony said, still sitting on the curb because no one had given him permission to stand. Rodriguez turned to Morrison and Chen. "You have 30 seconds to explain why you're detaining a federal law enforcement officer on his own property, after he identified himself, after he offered to show documentation, and after you confiscated his federal credentials which clearly identify him as Deputy U.S. Marshal Anthony Reed." Morrison began, "We received a call from a concerned neighbor." "A concerned neighbor." Rodriguez's eyes found Emily Parker. "And did this concerned neighbor provide any actual evidence of a crime? Any proof of forced entry, property damage, theft?" Silence. "Or did she provide a description of a black man existing in a space where she didn't expect him?" Rodriguez let the question hang in the air. "Release my deputy. Now." Anthony stood for the first time in 53 minutes, his legs stiff, his dignity somewhere between the curb and the evidence bags. Rodriguez handed him his credentials, his phone, his wallet, items that should never have been taken. The detectives retreated to their vehicles, suddenly finding paperwork urgently requiring their attention. But Rodriguez wasn't finished. "Mrs. Parker," she said, turning her full attention to Emily. "I need you to understand something very clearly. You filed a false police report. You wasted department resources. You racially profiled my deputy and created a situation that could have ended his life." Emily's face flushed. "I was just being cautious. We've had break-ins in the area." "Have you?" Rodriguez pulled out her phone, tapped a few screens. "According to the Willow Creek Police Department's public records, there have been 0 burglaries in this subdivision in the past 18 months. But do you know what there have been? 14 calls from this address." She gestured to Emily's house. 14 calls in 18 months. I had someone pull the reports during my drive over. Would you like me to read the descriptions? Emily said nothing. Suspicious black male walking through neighborhood. Unknown Hispanic individual going door to door, that was a legitimate census worker, by the way. African American teenagers loitering at park, those were residents' children waiting for their parents. 13 of your 14 calls targeted people of color. 13. Do you understand what that pattern indicates? Anthony found his voice, steady despite the anger burning in his chest. You could have killed me today, Mrs. Parker. Not with your hands, but with your assumptions. One nervous officer. One sudden movement. One escalation of a situation you created out of fear and prejudice. You weaponized police against me because I didn't look like what you expected a homeowner to look like. He turned to face his other neighbors, still lingering on their porches, phones lowered now but memories captured. And the rest of you. You watched. You recorded. Some of you probably thought this was entertaining. But not one of you walked over. Not one of you introduced yourself. Not one of you questioned whether maybe, just maybe, the black man unloading furniture into a house might actually belong there. An older woman on the porch of the corner house, Margaret Chen, Anthony would later learn, looked away, shame visible in the set of her shoulders. Rodriguez added, "We'll be filing federal civil rights complaints against Mrs. Parker and formal complaints against Detectives Morrison and Chen for their handling of this situation. Deputy Reed's civil attorney will be in contact regarding additional legal action." Emily Parker's face went white. Legal action? I was just trying to protect the neighborhood. You were profiling, Anthony said quietly. And now you're going to learn what that actually costs. The first video appeared on Twitter at 6:47 p.m. that same Tuesday. 43 seconds of Anthony sitting on the curb while Detective Morrison stood over him, Emily Parker gesticulating in the background. The caption read, "Black U.S. Marshal detained on his own property in Willow Creek Estates. This is America." By 9 p.m., it had 47,000 retweets. The second video came from a different angle, posted to TikTok by a teenager 3 houses down. This one captured Emily's initial confrontation, her voice shrill and certain, "We don't allow criminals in this neighborhood." The teen had added text overlay, "Karen calls cops on federal agent moving into his own house." 2 million views by midnight. A third neighbor had live-streamed portions of the incident on Facebook, providing running commentary that aged poorly in retrospect. "Drama on Birch Lane today, guys. Police have some guy detained. Emily says he's been casing the Henderson house for weeks." The comments section became a war zone of opposing perspectives within hours. By Wednesday morning, Anthony's humiliation had become national news. CNN ran the story at 7 a.m. Deputy U.S. Marshal detained on own property after neighbor's 911 call. The Chicago Tribune led with, "Racial profiling in affluent suburb, federal agents moving day becomes arrest." Local news trucks descended on Willow Creek estates like locusts, cameras pointed at 847, Birch Lane and Emily Parker's house with equal interest. The virality accelerated. 6 million views across platforms by Wednesday evening. #Willow Creek Karen trended nationally. Someone found Emily's real estate listings and flooded her business page with 1-star reviews. Would you call the cops on your black clients too? Imagine buying a house through someone who profiles by skin color. Thursday morning, Emily's brokerage released a statement, "The behavior displayed by Ms. Parker does not reflect our company's values." Effective immediately, Emily Parker is no longer affiliated with Premier Properties Group. Her photo disappeared from their website within the hour. Her husband's consulting firm faced similar backlash. Mark Parker Associates, "Where we assume you're a criminal if you're black," appeared in Google reviews. Clients began requesting contract terminations, not wanting their brands associated with racial profiling by extension. Friday afternoon, the Willow Creek Police Department held a press conference. Chief Williams, visibly uncomfortable, announced that Detectives Morrison and Chen had been placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation into their handling of the incident. "We are committed to serving all residents with fairness and respect," he read from prepared remarks, each word sounding hollow against the backdrop of Anthony's viral humiliation. The internet had rendered its verdict swiftly and mercilessly. Emily Parker had become a symbol, her name now synonymous with weaponized white fragility. But Anthony knew viral justice wasn't real justice. That would require something more permanent. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago hummed with anticipation. Reed versus Parker had attracted significant media attention, not just for the viral incident that spawned it, but for what it represented, a rare opportunity to hold individuals accountable for racial profiling through civil litigation. U.S. District Judge Sarah Chen, a 63-year-old jurist known for her precision and intolerance of theatrics, presided over a courtroom packed with journalists, civil rights observers, and law students studying the case for seminars on discrimination law. The Parkers sat at the defense table, Emily looking diminished in a conservative gray suit, her attorney whispering urgently in her ear. Anthony's legal team opened with methodical devastation. They presented Emily's Facebook posts chronologically, showing the escalation from "unfamiliar vehicle" to "unknown black male" to "stay alert." Each post appeared on the courtroom's projection screen, time-stamped and archived, her digital surveillance presented as evidence of sustained racial animus. The surveillance photos came next. Anthony's car photographed from Emily's window. Anthony measuring windows. Anthony carrying paint samples. Anthony existing. The prosecution would have you believe these are the actions of a concerned neighbor, Anthony's attorney argued. We contend these are the actions of someone who saw a black man and could only imagine criminality. The pattern evidence landed hardest. 14 911 calls in 18 months. 13 targeting people of color. 0 resulting in actual crimes discovered. The statistical improbability was damning. An expert witness in implicit bias testified about the psychological mechanisms underlying racial profiling, explaining how confirmation bias and cultural stereotypes create self-reinforcing cycles of suspicion. Then Emily Parker took the stand. Her attorney had advised against it, but Emily insisted she could explain herself, could make the jury understand her perspective. It was a catastrophic miscalculation. Under cross-examination, Anthony's attorney asked a simple question, "Mrs. Parker, in your Facebook posts, you repeatedly mentioned Mr. Reed's race. You described him as a black male. Can you explain why his skin color was relevant information to share with your neighbors?" Emily hesitated. "It was just descriptive. Just describing what I saw." "Descriptive. I see. And did you describe the white contractors who worked on the Henderson house before it was sold? Did you post about the white male with a ladder or the Caucasian woman measuring for curtains?" That's different." "How is it different, Mrs. Parker?" "They were professionals. They were supposed to be there." "And how did you know Mr. Reed wasn't supposed to be there?" The silence stretched for 10 seconds that felt like minutes. Emily's face reddened. He didn't fit. He didn't look like he belonged in this neighborhood." The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Chin gavelled for quiet, but the damage was done. Emily had said aloud what everyone already knew, that her suspicion was based entirely on Anthony's appearance, on his failure to match her expectations of what a Willow Creek resident should look like. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned, the verdict was unanimous, $2.1 million in damages. Compensation for emotional distress, punitive damages for willful violation of civil rights, and additional penalties for the pattern of discriminatory behavior. Emily Parker wept. Her husband sat stone-faced. Anthony felt no satisfaction, only exhaustion. Present day, 6 months after the verdict. Anthony stood on his back deck, watching smoke rise from the grill where burgers sizzled beside ears of corn still in their husks. His backyard had finally become what he'd imagined during that first walk through, a space for gathering, for community, for the kind of casual summer afternoon that had seemed impossible a year ago. The guests were a deliberate mixture. Carmen Rodriguez held court near the garden beds, telling stories about a fugitive chase through Montana that somehow involved a stolen chicken. The Johnsons, a young black couple who'd moved into the Parker house 3 months ago, laughed at her animated gestures. The Chen family, Margaret had been the first to apologize after the incident, brought homemade dumplings and spring rolls that now sat on a table beside traditional potato salad and grilled vegetables. Families with children played in the yard, brown and white and everything between, their laughter carrying across Willow Creek estates in a way that would have been unthinkable 18 months ago. The Parkers were long gone. Divorced within 4 months of the verdict, bankrupt from legal fees and lost income, relocated to separate states in an attempt to outrun their infamy. Their house had sold quickly once the price dropped to market value. Anthony tapped a glass, calling for attention. The conversations quieted, faces turning toward him expectantly. He'd thought carefully about what he wanted to say, about the message that needed to accompany this moment of apparent triumph. "I want to thank you all for being here," he began. "For some of you, this is the first time we've met properly, without police cars or cameras involved." Nervous laughter rippled through the group. "I know there's a temptation to treat this like a happy ending. The bad guys lost. Justice was served. We can all feel good about ourselves and move on." He paused, letting the words settle. "But I need you to understand something. What happened to me wasn't an aberration. It wasn't one bad person making one bad choice. It was a system, a pattern of assumptions we all carry about who belongs where, about who's trustworthy and who's suspicious, about who deserves the benefit of the doubt and who needs to prove their humanity before they're allowed to exist in peace." Margaret Chen nodded, her eyes glistening. Several others looked uncomfortable, which was exactly Anthony's intention. Emily Parker saw me and could only imagine criminality because that's what she'd been taught to see. But the rest of you, he gestured to the broader neighborhood, you watched. You recorded. You were entertained. And that silence, that passivity, that failure to question the narrative you were witnessing, that's also part of the system. He softened his tone slightly. I'm not saying this to make you feel bad. I'm saying it because change requires more than punishing the Emily Parkers of the world. It requires all of us examining our assumptions. Questioning our first instincts. Asking ourselves whether the story we're telling about a situation is based on evidence or on deeply ingrained bias. Anthony looked out at his backyard, at the diverse faces gathered there, at the neighborhood that had been transformed through pain into something slightly closer to the promise of its own marketing materials. So here's my challenge to each of you. The next time you see someone who doesn't fit your expectations of a space, whatever that means, ask yourself, what am I really seeing? What story am I telling myself about this person, and what's that story based on? And most importantly, what am I missing? He raised his glass. To actually being neighbors. To seeing each other clearly. And to the work of building something better than what we inherited. The guests raised their glasses in response. As conversations resumed and the afternoon light turned golden, Anthony stood on his porch, finally, truly home, knowing that the hardest work wasn't winning a lawsuit. It was changing the hearts and minds that made that lawsuit necessary in the first place. The question hung in the air, offered to everyone who would hear it, what am I really seeing? And what am I missing?